So we've talked about water, and we want to talk today about water speaking to us and water enlivening us. Isabel, you and I have spoken previously about the life force of water and the energy of water, and it's alive. So can you share with us more insights about that? And once again, anyone that wants to offer in and participate or ask some questions, don't hesitate, please.
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of factors to water's life force. I think it largely comes down to water's coherence and its electrical capacity and its hydrogen content and also its microbiological content as well. So water in nature, water that comes from a spring, for example, contains an entire microbiome of microflora and microbiota. Drinking water from nature is basically like drinking a probiotic, right? And for all of human history, we evolved in symbiotic relationship with this vast array of microorganisms that were nourishing us on every level. You know, we are more other organisms than we are our own cells. We have about 1.3 other organisms for every one of our own cells. So having this diversity of microbiota and microflora is really important to the life force vitality of water. And I think that that's something that often really gets overlooked, especially because, you know, our culture is so focused on water purity, and we have to get everything out of the water. We have to strip it down. We have to process it. And it's only when the water is completely empty that it's good for us. But, you know, that's the same logic that tells us to strip wheat down and process it until it's white flour. And we know that that turns a medicine into a poison. And we do the same thing with water when we strip it of all of its beneficial medicinal compounds, including the microbiota and microflora, and of course, including the mineral profile of the water as well. So when minerals are dissolved into water, they have another name, they're called electrolytes. And they're what give water its electrical capacity. One of the things, also the coherence gives it conductive capacity. But if there's no coherence and there's no electrolytes in the water, then water actually isn't a conductor, it's actually an insulator. So it does exactly the opposite. So it's really important for water to have a natural spectrum of minerals as well. Another thing that ties into the minerals is the water's magnetism. So I'm sure everyone on the call here knows that the water molecule is dipolar, meaning it has a north pole and a south pole. And when the north and south poles are, when they're aligned and they're properly charged, and water has a nice, healthy profile of magnetism, that also gives the water a charge, a life force energy to it as well. And it helps the water to keep its structure. So any living being, of course, we know water is life, and water is the first sign of life that we look for on other planets. And every seed, every embryo, without exception, begins its life in water. And bio water is quite different from the water that most of us encounter coming out of the tap, largely because of its coherence, because it has this biological capacity to conduct consciousness and to conduct life force. And it's only able to do so by having that coherence. There's a direct correlation between the symmetry of geometry, between sacred geometry and vitality. So I think that's a big
Isabel,
part.
as we talk about water and the life force of water, I think about the fact that we can live only on water, but we couldn't live only on food.
Mm-hmm.
So can you share more about that, about why we can only live on water and what's happening there, and about when I shared with you earlier about, well, if we have a piece of broccoli and the broccoli is alive, as soon as we cut it, its life force starts going away and it wilts. So how do we relate that to what happens to water as well?
Yeah, so I love that question. That's really insightful because we can live on water, because even the energy that we get from food, our body in the digestion process basically breaks that down. It takes a lot of energy from the water content of the food itself and most of all of the energy that we make in our body is actually hydroelectric energy. So it's the hydrogen that moves through the ATP synthase in our cellular membranes that goes into the mitochondria. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it right now, but basically it's what generates ATP. We have these nanomolars in our cell membranes. And depending on the quantity and the type of hydrogen that's in the water that we drink, or in the water content of the food that we eat, we don't just survive on calories alone. We really survive on this hydroelectric energy, and the process of phase changes in the water between the different hydrological cycles within our own bodies that actually mirrors the phase changes of the hydrological cycles on the planet as a whole as well. And that's really where we get our energy and our vitality from. I think it was Dr. Albert Szent-Györgyi who said that hydrogen is the fuel of life. And I think we often overlook the importance of the isotopes of hydrogen, not only in our water, but also in our food. Whether it's deuterium or protium makes a big difference as to how energized we become from our food or our water.
Beverly, could you weigh in because of the scientific work and activity that you've done with water and all different dimensions of water?
It's certainly true. The structure of water in the living state is different from bulk water. And I would say, Jerry Pollack has given us the fourth phase of water, but I think actually there are many more phases that are more subtle, even than his structure. And recently I've been thinking a lot about 5G, the coming fifth generation of wireless, and how that really changes the structure of water. Nobody's talked about that, but I'm writing about it now. And I'm really wondering what that's going to do to the living state, not just in our bodies, but everywhere. So that's been on my mind quite a bit.
So just tell us, so with the waves, whether it happens to be the microwaves or whether it happens to be utility waves, all these different waves, how do you see them impacting the water, and either in our body or in plants? Because you've done a lot of research and scientific evidence in that area. And what happens?
Think about all the biomolecules in the body. They're intimately connected with water. We can talk about the water of hydration around each biomolecule, which has some affinity for water. And we know that the activity of enzymes, which of course are the basis of all of our biochemistry, is greatly affected when you remove waters of hydration or add more water of hydration. And of course, those waters of hydration, those water molecules intimately connected with each biomolecule, have a structure that very much relates to the structure of that enzyme or that protein. And you start taking away water molecules or adding more water molecules, you're going to change the structure of the biomolecules. You're going to affect their activities. And therefore, you're going to impact not just one pathway in the living system, but many, maybe all pathways. It's impossible to say because water is so much the matrix of life, 70% plus water in our bodies. So how can it not have an effect? You add energy, you add waves to water, and you subtly shift its structure. What does this mean? Well, the water molecules will dance differently. And once they dance differently, then the biomolecules dance differently, to put it in colloquial language. So therefore, the dance of life is altered when we fool around with external fields that water absorbs strongly, such as microwaves. That is the wireless world all around us.
Thanks for bringing that point up, because a lot of people don't think about the effect of the wireless and how it's affecting us on a intracellular basis. Dolph, I know you've done a lot of studies on this, and rather than looking at, once again, the negative side, you've done work to look at ways that you can structure water and change the energy or frequency of water, which will be more positive. So could you talk about that angle?
Reality, we did over the last 14 years, we did maybe thousands of tests all over the world with water. And what we found out that there is almost no stable water in the world anymore. Not on Greenland, almost not on the Himalayas, also not in the US. I went to the Rockies, I went to multiple places, and it has everything to do with the pollution, including the electromagnetic wave pollution that we discuss. So if you want to bring back water to a certain structure, then you first have to understand on what level does water respond. And Victor Schauberger, as you just mentioned, was one of the people who understand that you can really restructure water in a certain way. But if you really want to understand that, you have to go in depth. And that also can mean that certain people can and understand how to destroy water. As a matter of fact, be aware you can change water in such a state that if you drink it, you can dehydrate yourself. And that is for a lot of people very strange, but it is really true.
How does that happen, Dolph?
And that has to do with the atomic structure that you can change. So that is why Schauberger took his secret with him.
Isabel, so you and I have talked about Victor Schauberger as really the water wizard. Why don't you, a lot of people don't know about Victor. You want to share some stories about Victor and about the vortexing and structuring of water?
Sure. But first, I just want to address something that was just mentioned as well, because I think that there are absolutely ways that we can fortify our bio water to be at least more resistant to the phase changes and the entropy and the denigration that happens from these waves.
I agree.
So one of the main things that happens with millimeter waves is it causes a rapid polarity reversal of the water molecules, where the north and south poles can switch up to 1 billion times per second, which is obviously incredibly unstable. But one theory is that by drinking highly magnetized water, magnetized with both poles, what the Russians call what do they call it? Miracle water, I think they call it. No, they call it wonder water. Anyway, but by drinking highly magnetized water, this actually gives more stability to the magnetization of our own biowaters. Another factor is, as Beverly was talking about, just how dangerous these EMFs can be. One of the reasons why they're so dangerous and they cause dehydration is because they actually cause our gap junctions in our bodies to resonate at a different frequency. So your gap junctions are basically like these long, under a microscope, that kind of look like fiber optic tubes or fiber optic cables that allow light frequency and energy to pass from one cell cytoplasm to the next without ever exiting into the extracellular matrix. And so when those actually start to resonate at a different frequency, then it disallows the osmotic flow of water in and out of the cells, right? Like the best way that we have of testing for hydration at all is called testing for phase angle. And basically that's just a test of how much electricity can pass through the cell membrane. So when we're talking about hydration and we're talking about our electrical energy at the cellular level, it's the same thing. And so in order to keep our gap junctions resonating at the right frequency, we want to keep our phase angle really high. And I think if we pay particular attention to that biomarker more than anything, then we can create a lot of endogenous resistance to all of the EMF pollution that's in the field. Because what happens when you have highly, highly coherent body water is it's going to be, I mean, of course, all water is constantly responding to everything in the environment, constantly changing its shape to everything. Every thought that you have, we all know this, it affects our bio water in some way. But if for years you consistently cultivate structure and coherence, then it's going to be more resistant to change. It's going to take a lot more to knock it out of a state of coherence. And this isn't something that, you know, you can just go drink a glass of structured water and you're good to go. It's something that really takes cultivation over time. You know, this is believed to be one of the reasons why Tibetan monks will chant the same mantras for decades and decades, because sometimes it takes that kind of consistency just to get the level of coherence in your body water that it's going to resonate at that frequency regardless of external stimuli that could knock it out, right? So the more coherence we have, the more that bio water actually acts as a buffer that almost, it's like it has a force field that protects us against EMF radiation as well. So
So one question I have is, so in being able to have water become more alive, Schauberger came up with this natural solution that he saw occur in nature of how water moved in rivers and streams and moved around rocks and moved in centripetal and centrifugal ways. So with water, we can just spin our water right like this, or we can take a spoon and put it in a glass. So what happens when we do that? What happens and how does that change the water? So everyone can do that any time of day.
Mhm. Yeah, movement is actually critical to water. Just like we need to move, water needs to move. Water has a body just like we do. Just like we need to breathe, water needs to breathe. So when water goes into a vortex, she breathes. Well, when she's moving at all, she breathes. She absorbs gases like oxygen and carbonic acid that are really necessary for her thriving. And also, whenever the molecules move together, they bond together. So rather than being incoherent and the hydrogen bonds forming and breaking apart, thousands of times per second, instead they're able to snuggle up and talk to each other because they're moving together, they're dancing together. It's just like when you're on a dance floor with your community, you feel more bonded to them. It's something an anthropologist called collective effervescence. And the same thing happens with water molecules. We are just scaled up versions of water molecules after all. And so what Victor Schauberger did, excuse me, is he looked at the way that water moves in nature. And what we're finding is that water moves in the exact same way in our own bodies. Your bodies of water and our bio waters move in the same way. Like your cerebrospinal fluid, for example, it doesn't just flow up and down your spine, it actually spirals up and down your spine. In German, the word for spinal column is spiral column. The word for vertebrae is vortices. Your blood, it doesn't just flow, it actually spirals through your veins. You have spiral striations on the inside of them that allows the water to keep its coherence and its molecular structure. Everywhere in nature, you see these spirals. Even as water flows through a river, it doesn't just flow in a straight path, it winds back and forth. And every time water turns around a bend in a river, the spiral switches direction. And also every time it tumbles over a rock, it creates innumerable inner vortices within it that both oxygenate and structure the water. And I mean, it's true on our body, in our bodies at every level. Even, maybe next time you pee, take a look down at your urethra and notice that even your urine comes out in a spiral. And so Victor's whole philosophy was comprehend and copy nature. And so when it comes to our drinking water as well, we want to make sure that she is treated just like the living being she is, that she's allowed to move and dance and breathe and become coherent. And then another thing that he talked about is the difference between mature and immature water. So a lot of times we talk about structuring our water like that's just the end game, like we just want to make it structured. But actually, you can have water that is structured but is still immature in Schauberger's parlance. So structuring water is kind of like building a house. You want to have a really solid, stable structure of the house with the beams and the walls and all of that. But then to mature the water, you want to inform it. So water that is in formation carries information. And that's just like furnishing the house with beautiful decor and bringing your family inside of it and creating beautiful memories there. So we don't just want to structure the water, we also want to inform the water with vibrational frequencies, memories, information, so that she's not just coherent but empty, she's coherent but full. Water is always seeking to fill herself up again. Always, always, she wants to fill herself up. That's why, as Theodore Schwenk said, she's the sensory organ of the earth. She's always paying attention to everything so she can fill herself with the vibratory and visual and auditory information. She's always sucking into herself the microorganisms and the minerals. And in fact, when she's robbed of all of that, not only is she immature and she needs to grow and fill herself, but she's what hydrologists call an aggressive solvent. So she can actually become really aggressive when she's been forcefully emptied, and then she sucks and leaches minerals and all kinds kinds of information from the environment, including negative stimuli. If she's empty, she's going to be more easily influenced by negative stimuli like EMFs and, negative emotions and that kind of toxicity as well. But when she is not just structured, but also well informed, she's going to have that natural buffer against any disharmonious frequencies in the environment.
So we've talked before about the memory of water and Masaru Emoto's work and the work that now Beta Austin is doing to extend that. And it seems esoteric, and for many people, it's hard to imagine that just by thinking, love or gratitude, that this water changes. So I'd love for some more comments or thoughts or concerns, or people saying that's, they don't believe that, that water receives everything. And so when we put, as you just said, positive vibrations and energy and decorations into the water, it receives that, and that helps our bodies and ourselves. Does anyone want to talk more about that, or debunk or refute that?
This is West. Yeah, of course, I've done a lot of work looking at water basically as a matrix. And I think this brings in the information part of it, which is really important. Water actually connects, it hydrogen bonds. So the water molecule is held together by conventional bonds, the H2O. But when you get a lot of water molecules together, they link to one another. And they do so in a way that they exchange those links with their nearest neighbors in liquid water up to like 1 trillion times per second. So really what we're looking at is a massive network that's a binary network, so that the connection with each neighbor is either on or off, which is exactly how computer networks work. It's a binary network. So you either connect or disconnect. So it's constantly connecting and disconnecting. And it does so that anything that moves into that network, any kind of a solute, it forms a shell around, so that it can recognize what it is based on the geometry of that shell. And as Beverly was saying, not only do biomolecules structure water, but it's a two-way street, in that the water then helps to structure the biomolecule. It helps proteins fold. It helps DNA, come into its double helix. And actually, what the body reads is not the code, is not the amino acid codes of the protein. It reads the geometry of these biomolecules. So it's very interesting. When we deal with water, water is actually an information network, and that's how we exchange information with what's in us, the water in us, to electromagnetic radiation, or anything that goes into the body makes a change in that network. That network then recognizes it changes its structure, and this happens instantaneously. And so it's been very interesting to look at the similarities between water as an information network, and the fact that physicists now are coming to they're sort of approaching a theory that information may be what underlies the structure of the whole universe, that it's all about information. So anyway, thought I'd just add that.
That's great, Wes. Thank you for sharing that. So let's come back to where is water our medicine that is bringing us health and vitality into our life, Isabel?
Well, I think it ties exactly into what Wes was just saying, that it really all comes down to information. It all comes down to, as Tesla said, if you understand vibration and frequency and resonance, then you have the keys to the universe right there. And Emoto said that the key to the universe is understanding that we're basically water. I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like that. And as Robert was saying, water is basically like this highly, highly sophisticated computer. Dr. Rustum Roy said that water is the world's most malleable computer. And I think in part it is because of that on or off, that connected or disconnected, but it also has a lot to do with the valence states of oxygen. Dr. Pollack talks about how there are 6 different valence states of oxygen, and rather than the binary code that the computers have of 1s and 0s, you basically have -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2, and another one. We have 6 states. And if you were to expand the math on that, it would make it so that water is about a billion times, each water molecule, or every cluster of water molecules, I'm not sure, is about a billion times more intelligent than the world's most intelligent computer. It has a billion times more information capacity. And then you say, okay, well, if there are at least 440,000 panels on every single cluster of water molecules, every memory cell of water molecules, at least 440,000 panels, each one of which is responsible for sensing, storing, transducing, and transmitting information about its environment, how does it actually transmit that information? Like, how can we access this information? And as it turns out, every picosecond, water receives information, and then within a picosecond, it re-emits that information at a frequency of, this is mind-blowing, this is like not even, we can't even conceptualize it, at a frequency of 1 quadrillion hertz. A quadrillion hertz. So the highest frequency thing that's ever been tested on a Reiki machine is like around, what, 300 or 500 hertz. I forget if it was rose oil or gold or something, but 300 to 500 hertz is really high frequency. Water emits at a frequency of 1 quadrillion hertz the information that it takes in, and it's able to do so because every single water molecule is 1 part matter, 1 part hydrogen, oxygen, and 1 trillion parts photons. A trillion parts light. A photon is basically a boson, and a boson is like the interface between the physical and the quantum realm, right? So a trillion parts photons to 1 part hydrogen and oxygen. So basically, water is liquid light. And I think light itself is the most powerful medicine, because we are light beings. You know, for every 1,000 molecules in our body, 999 of them are water. We're about 99.92 to 99.95% water molecules, which means we are literally liquid light. So I think in recognizing the structure and the electromagnetic capacity and just the light information in water, I think we will unlock whole realms of medicine that can only imagine at this point in history.
That leads me to ask Robert Slovak to chime in and share some of his insights about water being medicine and the healing properties of water, maybe specifically as Isabel has shared with us earlier about hydrogen. Robert, could you weigh in some thoughts there, please?
Well, molecular hydrogen is, we're talking something very different than water, and molecular hydrogen, even though it was ignored for many, many centuries as having physiological or biological relevance, except as an ingredient, it now is, you know, revered as everything from a special kind of antioxidant that has a unique ability to address hydroxyl radicals, and it's a regulator for the antioxidant systems such as glutathione, superoxide dismutase, catalase, etc. And this work was done by the Japanese at Nagoya University. And then we have illustrious people who've joined in and learned it very well, such as Tyler LeBaron. And if you don't know Tyler, you should go on his website, molecular hydrogen, molecularhydrogeninstitute.com. Very important. It gives you an overview of every aspect of molecular hydrogen. But just in the last, I was the first person who created the hydrogen tablet back in 2010. And I really didn't know the power of hydrogen while I was doing this. And now the hydrogen tablet or any hydrogen generating method, and there's inhalation devices now and little devices that use electrolysis or proton exchange membranes, that these things that make a water solution or infuse water with molecular hydrogen, just H2. I mean, this is nothing special. H2 has remarkable physiological benefits, both therapeutically and in just as a nutritive element in our daily lives. So I'm not sure if you want to take it any more than that, but you know, hydrogen is here to stay. There's so much being discovered. It's been one of the most successful recent, I think, nutrients that has been presented to humanity.
And so what are the healing benefits of hydrogen?
Well, I mean, it's this, you know, we can go on and on. One, as a very unique, powerful antioxidant that does not produce any adverse redox molecules in itself. Usually other antioxidants have a chain of consequences when they neutralize a free radical. It is a signaling molecule itself. That's probably its greatest new discovery. And it has, if you said, well, Robert, what's the one thing? Tell me one thing. It has the ability to tame oxidative stress in humans and animals without any other consequences. It has no contraindications, almost no matter what level you take. So it's probably the best and most benign of the antioxidants that one can take. And it's a great place to start for all of the chronic diseases whose character is oxidative stress.
So is that inflammation one of those things that it also addresses?
We're not allowed, remember, the FDA says we're not allowed. I was penalized very greatly about 8 years ago for using the word inflammation, and it's a forbidden word. And that's why we use the word oxidative stress, because they haven't figured out a way to police that one yet, but yes.
Okay. Well, Robert, thanks for being with us, and understand that you've got other things happening that you need to focus on. I want to ask Bob Bocock to chime in and share some thoughts with us, because I've seen you nodding your head and acknowledging these key aspects of water and how water is truly healing.
What I think I could add to this conversation, you know, listening to Beverly and Robert and Rudolph and everyone talk about it, is there's a certain level of understanding among this group, and all of us experience when we try to share with others that kind of semi-standoffishness and rejection of the concept, because the industrial complex has basically said, voodoo, witchcraft, black box, what are these people talking about? But you're all hitting on very, very important points of science. And so when Beverly talks about, you know, the 5G and the network, I mean, water is a better conductor than wire. It literally is. When water runs through pipe, the electromagnetic field that it causes is how we detect and locate a pipe. Because water flowing in a direction shows that electrical flow. You know, the water diviner, you know, people still, you know, after hundreds of years of success, look at that and say, I'm skeptical. But it's actually the detection of that magnetic flow of the water. What I would like to see as a group, because like I say, you guys are talking at a different level than the general public, is the ability to engage them in the root of science that they understand, that Joe Sixpack understands, that the soccer mom gets. You know, from the beginning of time, you know, when utility services were provided to homes, you know, gas, electric, water, telephone, what did we do with the electric meter on the back of our house? Well, we grounded it to the water pipe. Okay. And there are things like galvanic corrosion. Go look at that white mess on top of your hot water heater. Okay. That is the electronic disruption of water. And it's physically visible for most people. And they start to understand sacrificial anodes, cathodic protection, you know, the electrical concepts of water that we've just taken for granted for 100 years in this country, that Joe Sixpack understands. Do not apply dissimilar metals in the plumbing of pipes and water, and things like that that can occur. They prove our points, in science that Joe Sixpack and Soccer Mom get. And then it begins to become more and more shareable, okay? Because you all know that and understand the rejection I'm talking about when, oh, you know, the drinking water people say it's safe and you guys are all, you know, blah, blah, blah. But these things are real. And it's bringing you back into the science. You know, everybody thinks pH is about acidity and alkalinity of water. pH stands for potential hydrogen. Okay, when you tell somebody that's actually done, you know, a 4.0 in college chemistry that pH means potential hydrogen, they look at you perplexed. Okay, but that's exactly what you've all shared in this call today, is that concept of potential hydrogen. And so when you bring it back into those aspects, you know, I was listening to Isabel talk about how water flows through a stream. Do you know how many cavitation devices are sold on the market today to treat water with cavitation? When water goes down a creek and it hits rocks and it moves and it does all these things, that's called cavitation. Do you know that cavitation of a pump out of synchronized state will actually eat a hole in a pipe? Because of cavitation. Cavitation is a powerful thing. It started mechanically, but it disrupts electronically. And so these are the concepts you guys are talking about in a mystical way. If you bring them back to science when you start, the rest will begin to make sense. So that's kind of what I was observing.
Yeah. So Gina, with the work you're doing at the Hydration Foundation, trying to bring the science down to more of a mass level, can you share some insights that you have, how you're able to do that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. This is really exciting to share with you guys, but I agree with you, Robert. We really need the public to become aware. So we started a social media campaign explaining the 30 top water scientists in the context of baseball trading cards. So they show up looking like baseball heroes with their work, their breakthrough idea, how that idea matters to you, and then a quirky fact about it. And of course, we're doing Victor Schauberger and Gerald Pollack and May Wan Ho, forgive me. And we've started with 30, and we're releasing those once a week from now through October, when the water conference in Baden-Baden, convened by Jerry Pollack, and of course he's one of the cards, will actually appear. Now don't get crazy on me, but we're hoping to actually print these cards and sell them as an NFT, if any of you are into that world, to fund projects in water. But I believe we founded the Hydration Foundation, and Jerry's on our board precisely to spread public awareness of how exciting water is, and share the great people who've already done breakthrough work, and then continue to draw people in with practical things like recipes.
So what are some of the ways that you communicate in a more mundane, simplistic way for the average person to be able to understand the vitality and the power of water in both?
Yeah, well, I think using the arts is a really powerful way to communicate science, and that the more we bring people to surprising, mysterious statements, that then their curiosity allows them to step into the next level. We don't have to get them to all of the science and the understanding of it. We just have to get them to a place where they want to take the next step in their own life, like putting a little salt in their water, or finding out that water conducts electricity. Oh, that's happening in my body. Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. Maybe I'll look at that video by Jean-Claude Gimbarteau, which shows how much we're made of water. You know, we're just inviting people into the visual and the audio, using John Stewart Reed's work, for example, and frequencies and sound, and how important sound healing is going to be to where we're talking about these things. We also last year did a hydration solution summit. So we had over 30 doctors talking about, doctors and scientists, Jerry and other, John Stewart Reed, many of our colleagues here. And we continue to try to promote this science in ways that links to public understanding. So Beverly, I'm going to be calling you. I want your paper when it comes out, and we want to find a way to share, explicitly to the public. Look, this means for you that you should think about resting more often in your life, not driving yourself so crazy. Isabel, your work is beautiful. I'm so happy to see what you're doing. And any way we can support you and advance your work, please. We'll connect.
Thanks, Gina.
Yes.
So you talked about art being a mode of communication,
Yes.
and people have different ways of learning or bringing information. Some people are visual, some people are auditory, some people are sensory.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you speak about that, I think about the visual side, and we've had some experts show what happens to either the water itself or maybe even your blood that's happening. And I think about the plant world, as Bob, you had mentioned about how plants are so deeply impacted. And I wonder if anyone has this or thinks about, let's brainstorm here. How can we show and teach people and have them understand that are not scientists, that are just, dealing with their daily lives and think that tap water's fine and that their bottled water's fine and showering in this is fine. All those things are fine to understand without trying to make it too alarming and to really
Mm-hmm.
be like, oh my goodness, I never thought about that. I never realized that. I never understood that. So we can explain to them the water you're taking in is deeply impacting either one, your health and your dis-ease, right? And whether that's physical, emotional, biological, and neurological. But then I also want to try to bring in, how do we bring in the positive side? So we're not just being negative and not just being critical of water, saying here, by drinking this water, which is why I came to hydrogen. And I probably haven't shared with you all, but I've been in 3 years of development, thanks to Robert Slovak, of a product that we are going to be launching in the next 3 or 4 months. It's going to be a functional water that's based on molecular hydrogen. And we're going to be bringing this to the masses in the market in the next 4 months. So you'll be hearing more about that from me as time moves on. But let's brainstorm and talk about, what can we do to help people understand this and to make wise choices about their water.
Well, Stuart, I'm excited about what you're doing. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to share that the Hydration Foundation, in partnership with the Buckminster Fuller Institute, is about to launch a huge project. It's a traveling water museum using the arts to draw people through experiences, immersive experience. Okay, we're not going to dunk them in water, but we are going to dunk them in frequency. We are going to bring them inside their own body through the work of cameras that have gone inside the body to show our fascial tissue. And we just were invited to present at the Flint Water Festival in July. So we'll have our visual a material that we already have developed and our educational material about why water can be so foundationally important for you and your health. And again, our whole focus is always saying, yes, here's the scare, but we really focus on the solution. Like you can start resonating your own water at a different level through multiple techniques and sharing those, including chanting, singing. We all know these, as an anthropologist, I'm bringing these indigenous forms forward as well. So I think the arts are key, even for example, a label on your new drink. We should be getting all graphic design people involved, and they have brilliant ways of visually capturing people's imagination without having to put all the science in their head, just the feeling of betterment.
So Dana, love to hear from you as a medical expert and your prowess in homeopathy, which is all about water. Can you share some insights with us about this and how we can help the layperson understand the importance of water and their health?
Homeopathic medicines, of course, are made with water, except for the mineral remedies, which are initially triturated. And they are triturated usually with lactose, which has its own water part in that element. And the process of making the medicines in water includes vigorous succussion. The word succussion means a much more rigorous shaking against a hard surface so that it creates turbulence. And that turbulence also creates bubbles and this technical word called nanobubbles, which brings oxygen down into the water and increases the water pressure substantially. And then what's so fascinating ultimately is that the bubbles and the bubbles blanch against the side walls of the test tube that they're in. And conventional pharmacological material science research finds that 6 parts per million of silica fragments fall off the glass wall into the solution. And because of the increased water pressure, whatever you're making into a medicine will be pushed into these silica fragments. Then when you dump out 99% of the water, a lot of the fragments just cling to the glass walls. So what's interesting is modern spectroscopy, even 3 different types of spectroscopy, were able to find nanoparticles of each of the 6 different mineral substances that this study published in Langmuir was testing, and they were gold, silver, copper, tin, platinum, and zinc. And so no matter how many times they did the dilution, they found nanoparticles of each of these substances. Quite fascinating. And when skeptics of homeopathy say, well, those homeopathic medicines are beyond Avogadro's number, that's when you know that the scientist doesn't know shit from Sherlock. Because Avogadro's numbers does not account for the turbulence, the silica fragments falling off the glass walls, the increased water pressure, the pouring out of 99% of the water, and the fragments clinging against the glass walls. That's not part of the formula. So Avogadro's number really is a really important principle in mathematics and physics, but not in biology. And in homeopathy, the making of the medicine is much more complex than just numbers.
Thank you, Dana.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to hear your opinion on double helix water. I've been reading David L. Gann's work lately, and as the homeopathy expert, if you could put some of that into context, that would be really interesting.
Well, you know, it is interesting. I attended a conference on double helix water at Caltech. And Jerry was one of the many, Jerry Pollack was one of the many speakers. Actually a professor at Caltech who has since passed away was a leading innovator of looking at various alternative treatments for children that were on the spectrum. You know, there haven't been any formal trials on double helix water in human populations. There's just individual case reports. But the guy that actually developed double helix water, Dr. Lowe, L-O, you know, what was so interesting about his earlier work is that the head of UCLA's chemical engineering department was fascinated by it because they were using it in certain industries, and it was able to clear out these big smokestacks that need frequent cleaning, and they needed to do so much less when they were using some of Dr. Lowe's products. So I actually invested in a company that Dr. Lowe was working on, but there were extremely strong economic forces that led to its demise, and a hostile takeover of the company, and the money ultimately getting lost, and it was really a pity. But I'm intrigued by, and in fact, my company even sells double helix water. So it's not an absolutely firm foundation, but intriguing foundation.
Thanks, Dana. So Isabel, I mean, you are part of a new way of being in young leaders on this planet. And as you know, we've created a community called the Water Emissaries, and Madeline had to drop off, but who's leading our effort there. And it's critical for the young people to have a voice, to be able to speak, to become educated first, because most of them have no thoughts and understandings about water. And then, as Bob Bocock was saying, how do we communicate to them so they understand this and it's in their language? So you're masterful at that, Isabel, and just love to hear some of your ways that you do that and the messaging that you have, particularly to the youth, so they can be the leaders in the future of the water industry.
That's a great question. I don't know that I have a cohesive answer or that I've ever really thought about it. The way that I put my work out there is just, I'm a nerd and I'm just fascinated by everything about water. I can't stop studying, I can't stop reading, but I really appreciate beauty and design and connection. I really want to connect with the people that follow me. I don't necessarily focus just on the youth. I actually have no idea who my demographic is. I have a following and I don't know how they find me. But I just try to put everything across in as beautiful a way as I can, and a way that somehow connects to people's emotions, because I feel like, that's the only way to really get through to people, is if they can find some level of personal connection to it. And that usually comes on an emotional level. And also, our Western minds, we tend to come at things from a very left brain perspective. So I try to find that I don't even have to try. Water shows the meeting place where spirit and science meet. And that's really that point that fascinates me the most. So, most of my work so far has been in the realm of hydration and biology, because I felt that that was the point that people could relate to first and foremost, as something that would be applicable in their own lives. Or at least most of my online work has been mostly hydration and biology and drinking water. But in the offline world, I only moved my work online when COVID hit. Before that, I was just teaching workshops in person for years. And my in-person workshops span the spectrum of not only that side of things, but also ecology and the geopolitics of drought and desertification, the sort of myth and mystery of ancient indigenous wisdom teachings. I've had the great honor to study with numerous indigenous elders about their teachings around water. Also, some of the recent inventions in medicine and agriculture and free energy, and how water holds the keys to all of those. Even some of the more like strange aspects of water, like the Celtic water witchcraft traditions. So my work actually spans a whole sphere, but in terms of what I bring online, I really try to make it, okay, what's applicable, what can people actually relate to personally, and what can they implement in their lives?
So I start thinking about the youth and their foodies, right? They're all into food, and it's like the biggest part of their life, and they will buy whatever product or whatever brand because of either one, the story that it has, two, the way that it cares for people, the planet, all the supply chain side, and really looking at the cost is not a limiting factor for them. And so I wonder how we can look at plant-based protein and all the other quote nutraceutical foods, whether it happens to be the chia seeds or it happens to be kombucha, or all the different mushroom chaga, ashwagandha, is becoming the standard for people to be buying. How can we take this into the water industry? And I'm clearly working. I think hydrogen is one way to do that, but I'd love some other thoughts about how do we bring that forward for water, for people to become wateries instead of foodies.
Well, I think when it comes to really getting the younger generations, it has to be sexy and it has to be funny, and it can't take itself too seriously. The only way to get them to pay attention.
Well, I'd love for us to work on that together, and for the well community, for us to do this. And as you said, Isabel, it's not just for the youth, but I think the youth are really critical voices that will be leading us. But it's all of us to have these voices as well, and to have people understand the fundamental aspects of water being impacting every single dimension of our lives, in our bodies and outside of our bodies. And clearly, I mean, water, with everything, every food we're eating, the water was grown in that. It was used in the processing of whatever, however the food was manufactured and delivered to us. And yet, as Bob said earlier, we just take it for granted. So I mean, I'd love for us to just brainstorm and popcorn and come up with ideas of how we can, you know, be able to language this for people to get it.
I think that it's going to take some, you know, putting things down on paper and writing some themes. But, you know, like I said, I like to go back to the basic stuff that people already have a good understanding for, and then build on it progressively to where, you know, everyone on this call already is. And I think that, you know, Beverly was talking about research work that she's currently doing, you know, in the impacts of 5G and how that wavelength has, you know, certain disruptive, you know, effects. And then there are a lot of resources out there. You know, everybody keeps talking about the Pollock Lab and the work that he's done, would be to get, you know, some of these things through his laboratory and revalidate it, even the old science, and then have his students literally draw those lines. You know, it's funny. I'm working with IAPMO and ASHRAE and all the different plumbing, all the different code writing organizations nationwide right now. There's 8, and they're all in conflict with each other. And literally, one guy called me just out of the blue, and we just put down a simple 10-step roadmap that sits on one 8.5 by 11 sheet. And it made all 8 code writing organizations minds blow. It was, you know, a 3rd grade level document, and we just called it the roadmap for, you know, design, you know, premises plumbing and mechanical systems protection of water. It's amazing. You know, water goes from a source, you know, through about 10 different treatment processes, then enters your building, goes through mechanical devices, you know, cooling towers, boilers, all different aspects. It's constantly changed, and then it goes out as wastewater, where it's retreated and then comes right back into the water cycle again. You know, there's been talk even just in the last 3 months, some of the science that's come out on how water absorbs these contaminants and then releases them. Right now, people are experiencing PFAS as a health advisory of 70 nanograms per liter, 70, okay? And people are freaking out about that. But I will tell you that the rain that's falling into the Great Lakes today is at 1,000 nanograms per liter. So literally 930, you know, orders, you know, levels higher in rain. Well, how's it getting into rain? Because we're flaring the methane at our wastewater treatment plants. We're cloud seeding with PFAS from methane flares at our landfills and our wastewater treatment plants. And they're all over the country. And we're just putting it right straight up in the air. And then it's the rain in the largest freshwater body on Earth.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's the idea would be take basic concepts and get science to revalidate them and draw the nexus to the advanced science.
Thanks, Bob. Wes, do you have some insights you could share?
Yeah, in my opinion, there's a couple, maybe 3 things that I've found that really complicate trying to get people to recognize water. You know, the vital functions that water is, and that we are really animated water. The first is it's been so much commodified. So for a long time, we buy it like we buy electricity, we buy, you know, natural gas, everything. So it in the psyche, it becomes, you know, kind of a utility. It's just it's just something else we pay on a monthly basis for that comes out of our tap. I think the second thing is that water, that we are basically animated water, is a tough thing to get across, because it's not intuitively obvious that that's the case. The way the human brain is set up is really to recognize what's useful from an evolutionary viewpoint, and not necessarily what's important from a more fundamental one. And I think this is where we get back into, people have mentioned art. And in the last decade, I've spent more time working with artists than I have with other scientists, because I don't think you're going to get to people intellectually because that's not really their strong point, and because they've been indoctrinated for so long into water being this commodity and not recognizing that everything is water, that to try to reverse that in an intellectual manner is going to be nearly impossible. I mean, there's so much unlearning that's going to have to happen. But artists are able to reach people from an emotional level. They're able to touch their heart and their psyche and bypass their intellect. And I think that's going to be key to try to get this out. And there may be other ways, it may be sound. I've been particularly interested in how artists view things. And I think artists have helped me to try to get my research out in an understandable way, in ways that I couldn't think of because of my training, because I've been trained as a scientist. So I have inherent biases that prevent me from seeing the way that that people can kind of absorb information. And I think this science art thing is important. And maybe just tons of stuff of human bodies as water to get the idea that really we are water physically and animated and structured in ways that make us look like we are, and that we're not that much different than a tree. It's just that the water in the tree is structured a little bit differently than the water in us, but we're the same.
That's great, Wes. So Gina, back to you with the art of water. What are you doing there? Can you share with us some examples?
Yes, the art of water, I think just this water museum project in our goal to bring the wonder of water to people. Let that resonate and let water lead people. They don't need the science, they need the experience, because that's what we're working with broken water now. Everyone's filled with broken water, and getting people first filled with good water is going to change their own perceptions. Literally, how much structured water is in your eye socket is how you perceive more with water with more clarity, the world with more clarity. And I think we don't have to nail the science for them. We just have to nail the feeling better. And the ways to do that, I think, are available to us also as leaders in water, and also people who we ourselves are led by water. So I think water is calling us and letting us do this amazing work. It's a joy to be with all of you.
Specific artists that are creating images that are part of your...
Of course, we can follow Dr. Emoto's work. Everyone responded to Dr. Emoto's work. So, we can build on that, draw people in. I also think Isabel is right. The word hydration is a very effective word to start the conversation with people around water. They're already interested in that. And using visual beauty, Dr. Emoto's work, and then we use John Stewart Reed's work, and then we use a lot of frequency work of sound and vibration. You just let people feel it. We don't have to get to their rational mind to make these changes. We have to get to their sense of wonder and reverence. When I talk to people, and I'll put a link in our chat for you, I try to help them understand how much a body of water they are, that they are literally, their tissue is water tissue. We are just like jellyfish with bones. That's really what the material is. And introducing people to visuals of that is really exciting and wonderful. So I think we're on a roll. We're not in the bad spot anymore. We're in the exciting open era.
Thank you. Well, this has been, to me, one of the most fulfilling and most important well gatherings we've had to talk about what we're talking about here. And as Bob really directed us to bring this to the masses so they can understand this, and we all are relating and aligned to say, yes, how do we enable people to understand we are water, and that water's power of both healing and disease, and that we can have water as our medicine. And as Isabel has said, hydration before medication. I love the idea of art and how we can bring art into this. And I just have thoughts, and I want to leave on this note for us all to come back and think about this. I think about children drawing water and having those images from children about how they see water, and other artists creating art around their visual perceptions of water, for us to begin to have people connect with that in, as you said, Gina, in a more visceral way and in a more emotional way, which Isabel does extraordinarily. And if you all haven't seen the content that Isabel has done on her website, please do look at it. It's incredible. As a matter of fact, one of the images, art that I love so much that you created, Isabel, it's a woman's body, and that in her body is the ocean, and a wave that is flowing and washing through her body. And to me, that image is exactly what's happening. And so
I
maybe,
can't take credit for that. It's an artist named Akane.
well,
I love that image too.
yeah. So I think any more images that we have that we can begin to start sharing, as we're all agreeing, is another way for us to communicate to people. And it's just time for us, and for us to bring forth water, and as Wes said, to move beyond this commodity and this taken for granted life source, and for people to wake up to understand that. And it's going to take us to come forth with these creative ideas, and our community to bring this forward in a way that is going to really shift our relationship to water, which is, of course, ourselves, because as we are water bodies, that we'll have a different relationship with ourselves as we will with everything else on the planet, because it is all water.